Hey, what's up, guys? Thank you all for joining us for yet another great expert roundtable. Thanks again for joining us. We got a great event for you guys today. I see a lot of you guys are still sticking around from the last event, so thanks for hanging out with us all day. For those of you who have done these back-to-back sessions with me before, you know that a lot of times my brain starts to crash out towards the end of them, but thankfully I brought back up today. We're going to be talking all about Petya versus Wannacry and how ransomware seems to be getting worse and worse by the day. We've assembled a truly awesome team of specialists today to kind of help everyone digest that and figure out what we need to learn about this. So without further ado, let's go ahead and start it off with a round of introductions so you guys can meet our panel of experts. Let's batting first. You guys might have seen him on the air a couple of weeks ago. Excited to have him back representing Arcserve, Mr. Stacy Budd. Stacy, how's it going today?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me back. Glad to be here today.
Very cool. Stacy, can you tell us a little about yourself and what you do for Arcserve?
Sure. So I am stationed out of Tampa, Florida, and what I do at Arcserve is I'm a pre-sales consultant, meaning that what I demo product, I go in and I coach customers on best practices and how to set up things, and I'm that first tier before it ever gets to more of a post-sales kind of roll up or something like that as well.
Very cool. Stacy, where are you calling us today from?
Out of Tampa, Florida.
All right, wonderful. Thanks for joining us, Stacy. Looking forward to hearing from you. Our next panelist is representing Mimecast, Mr. Matthew Gardner. I'm sorry. Already, it's going.
All right. Hey, Matthew, how are y'all? Matthew Gardner here from Mimecast. We're a cloud provider of email security and archiving services, and I am out of Watertown, which is a small town just outside of Boston, and I focus on technical marketing.
All right, wonderful. Thanks for joining us as well. Our next panelist, not actually joining us from Darrell K. Royal Stadium in Austin, but somewhere close by, representing Alien Vault, Mr. Mark Allen. Mark, how's it going today? Oh, Mark, you're on mute. Let me unmute you.
We're off to a good start. We're off to a good start. Thanks for the intro there, Justin. Yeah, not actually in front of Darrell K. Royal Stadium, but close by in Austin, Texas. I head up the sales engineering team here at Alien Vault. Really glad to be a part of this today.
All right, very cool. And just so you guys know Emily Downs, big Texas A&M Aggies fan. That background is like making her start to like shake. So if you see my table like start to shake a little bit, that's why. It's just the fury coming over from the other side of the table. But thanks for joining us, Mark. We're looking forward to hearing from you as well. And last but not least, always excited to have him on. He is the CEO of KnowBe4, Mr. Stu Showerman. Stu, welcome back. How are you doing today, sir?
Hi, guys. Doing great.
Stu, can you tell us a little about yourself and what you do for KnowBe4?
All right. Well, I started KnowBe4 7 years ago, today, as a matter of fact. What we help you do is train your end users to make smarter security decisions. Really, that's what KnowBe4 does.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, and Stu, where are you calling us today from?
We are in Clearwater, Florida, which is 20 minutes away from Tampa. So, hello.
Stacy's you. Awesome. All right. Well, guys, before we go any further, there's a few things that I want to give you guys a shout out. You guys know all the deal by now. Chat widget, always a great crowd. This one is no exception. If you guys want to pop in and say hi, we always love seeing where everyone's from, but also more importantly, what you guys think about today's show. And then we've also got some resources available from all four of our sponsors today. So make sure to check that out. A lot of expert tips about how to make sure that ransomware doesn't take over your organization. And most importantly, the Q&A widget. Let us know if you have any questions. Chat, as always, is blowing up. So if you do post a question in chat, we probably are going to miss it. So make sure to get those questions in Q&A. And as a special thank you for hanging out with us today, one of y'all is going to be going home with a GoPro Hero 5 with a head strap. So it'll be there to capture all of your exciting IT pro adventures that you get into on a day-to-day basis. So good luck to all you guys. Get those questions in, and we will announce the winner of that GoPro at the end of the show. All right, well, let's go ahead and get into it. All right, so y'all, it's no surprise, you know, ransomware is in the news today. Most recently, we've had Wannacry, that was earlier this summer, and then followed by Petya. It just seems like a lot of this stuff is just coming more and more to the forefront of not just those of us who are in IT, but everyone, you know, including my mom who asked me about it recently. So maybe Mark, we'll start off with you. You know, what would you guys say is kind of the reasoning of why these attacks in particular were so effective?
Well, I think a big part of it had to do with the simplicity. Once they, being the attackers, were able to find this exploit, this Eternal Blue exploit that was likely put together by government agencies, you know, the simplicity of just being able to go and demand a ransom for something that most people are terrified of, right? Being able to say, hey, we have access to all your files, you're locked out, and we're going to we're not going to give that up until you provide us a sum of money, somewhere in between, I think usually $300 to $500 over Bitcoin, you know, over BTC. So I think in some regards that's probably why it was you know, so prolific. The fact that there were so many different machines out there that just simply didn't have this vulnerability patched, and then met with the fact that, you know, there's a lot of mechanisms built into both ransomwares, both not Petya and Petya, as well as Wannacry, right? So there's a lot of transport mechanisms to be able to quickly proliferate that throughout your network. So once it's in, you know, it's attempting to go out and infect others. That's nothing new. But again, just going back to the fact that there's so many different vulnerable machines out there that were susceptible to this.
Matthew, anything to add to that? You know, what do you feel like made these two in particular kind of the infamous ones, the ones that were most famous?
Well, I'll take a slightly different tack. I guess they were famous because they became famous, and they became famous because they were widespread. But you, in the first part of the question, you said successful, and I'm thinking, well, whoa, was it successful? I mean, Wannacry, supposedly they pulled in 130 grand, but caused maybe billions of dollars in loss. So if they're money-oriented cyber criminals, that was a horrific mistake, you know, a horrific fail, really. They impacted so many systems and didn't make much money. So it raises all sorts of complex questions like, well, then were they really money-oriented cyber criminals, or were they somebody else? And the other thing that I sort of take away is that they were both widely publicized, which has like a cutting edge, you know, two sides of the coin. On one side, I like security issues that are publicized because it draws awareness and management pays attention and wonders how about their security controls and maybe adjust their investments to make better and smart, you know, more investments. But then on the other side, you know, how many people have faced the, you know, the call from the upper management, like, are we vulnerable to Wannacry? And I'm like, well, what about all the hundreds of other types of ransomware? What about the other dozens and dozens of other types of attacks? So, you know, I'm very conflicted about this sort of Petya Wannacry. It obviously shows off, you know, a basic weakness of not patching systems like the previous speaker mentioned, but it raises all sorts of other issues that are, you know, we're just beginning to grapple with.
Steve, what do you feel like do you feel like these, you know, the fame of these two attacks, but, you know, just the rise of ransomware in general is like a foreshadowing of things to come, and what do you think are kind of some of the big lessons we should be learning from them? Steve?
Yeah, listen, both of these were not necessarily immediately caused by social engineering. Both of these were essentially worms riding on top of a 0-day. The infection vector wasn't necessarily clearly established from the get-go. The lesson learned, obviously, is that if Microsoft comes out with a patch for an SMB communications protocol, you need to patch like the next day. You cannot afford not to patch. That's one of the things that came out of this. Not patching ultimately is an invitation for downtime.
Stacy, anything to add to that? How do you feel like, what lessons should we be taking away? And how is this kind of foreshadowing?
Well, I kind of feel like those lessons, although they're there and they're reminding us of those lessons, it's lessons that clearly people should have learned a long time ago, right? And as well as, protect your data, have ways in case, exploits do get vulnerabilities do get exploited, make sure that you have ways to recover from those things quickly as far as that goes as well. It just amazes me how the community, and when I say the community, the technical community out there still does not apply patches, and they still don't do some of these things that could quickly, resolve some of these issues that are out there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Matthew, let's go back to you. Stu brought up, the trickiness of having to deal with zero-day vulnerabilities. How do you recommend organizations kind of stay on top of it? Because that can already be a full-time job. You still have to kind of do the rest of your work, but every day that it's out there is a risk that you're having to take. So how do you feel like you would recommend folks approach that?
Yeah, I think almost every one of these that comes out, it's like back to the basics. So we already mentioned one of them, basics of patching high priority vulnerabilities. If the systems had been patched, if there had been sufficient backups, if they had a business process and the people side of the security equation were more or less under control, this would be sort of a non-issue. It would be at worst maybe a minor infection that got onto some of the systems, but people's operations wouldn't come down. So it's like almost every case where I see these exploits hitting organizations in any wide way. It's like, what about if you've done the basics, the impact would be not hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. It would be, thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. So unfortunately, it's nothing sexy, but it's like back to the basics and making sure the organization are doing all the things we know we should be doing, but for whatever reason can't do it sufficiently or can't do it fast enough.
All right, Stu, what about you? As far as from a user perspective, protecting against zero-day vulnerabilities.
Well, the bad guys are generally very innovative in coming up with I think the percentage is at the moment 69% of your attack vector is still email. So a user receiving a very real looking email from someone that sends their resume and opening it up is a very highly suspect kind of activity, which instantly makes you vulnerable for a bad infection. Could be, I see somebody saying, Stu, video quality is very low. Maybe you guys can do something about that. I have a 1080p HD camera over here, so it's not me. Generally speaking, your end users needs to be trained to a point where they see these things and understand that's too risky and simply click on the fish alert button and send it over to incident response. This is just another layer on top of all the existing layers that you already have, that you should have, including all your existing filters, your backups, and for instance also any kind of edge device, your like what Mimecast has over here. You have to have all that stuff in place, and your user trained.
All right. I definitely wanted to hit up the kind of backup component early, but we'll get into this a little bit more. But Stacy, we'll go to you next. As far as like understanding how good of protection your backup situation currently is, specifically for ransomware, what are some of the things that you recommend every IT department start evaluating?
Right. So this is a conversation I have at least 3 times a day with customers. And it goes around really understanding the value of your data, understanding that not all data is created equal, right? Understand and put a dollar value to your data. And then at that point, develop a strategy of how far back you can afford to lose that data, right? And that will then govern, do I want to back up that data hourly? Do I need to do a continuous protection level on that particular type of data? Is once a day fine, right? So where does that meet? And then put a product in place like Arcserve, right, or something like that, where you can take advantage of those different aspects and then test, right? Never trust a backup. Always verify, verify, verify. Have not only the fact that you can test, and automated testing really helps with that because it takes one level away from the IT administrator where he doesn't have to worry about that. He gets the reports, everything's working, screenshots, those kind of things. But then, also have that recovery process documented in case they're not in the office and somebody else needs to do the recovery as well. So documenting those processes, understanding what those processes need to be, that's all very important to this.
All right. I wanted to talk next with Alienvault. Mark, can you tell us a little bit of insight as far as signature-based protection? How effective is that against ransomware? And if you don't have the signature for that malware, can it still be effective?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a little bit something I want to respond to maybe in 2 parts, Justin. So signatures, for those who aren't familiar, basically take a thumbprint of a file, usually in the form of a hash, and then look for that signature, that thumbprint, through scanning of network information. And that's usually done with like a span port or a tap or a mirrored port. They're all kind of shared term for basically the same thing. But what that really is going to allow you to do is see if that malicious payload has come across the wire. So the question is signature-based detection going to be effective for these? The simple answer is no, not in all cases. And the reason for that is because there are millions of different variants for each piece of ransomware. If I recall correctly, I'm not sure if it was the Verizon data report that was done a little while ago or another that I'm referencing, but I do recall seeing the number from 2015 to 2016 jump in terms of variants of ransomware from something like 2 million to about 16 million different variants of ransomware. So there's just simply way too many variants out there. You need to take a look. I mean, you certainly want to keep the signature-based detection. That's a critical part of any kind of security monitoring effort that you might have. But you also want to try to combine that with other methodologies. So certainly vulnerability scanning, understanding what is normal, kind of finding a baseline in the environment, but then also looking at outbound traffic. And I think a lot of times that is neglected. Ransomware obviously needs a way to come in, and we want to do everything that you can to kind of block that, obviously with your firewalls, with signature-based detection, with endpoint protection, a variety of different tools that we're all familiar with for keeping those from coming in. But in today's age, you pretty much have to live with the fact that these infections are coming in regardless. These payloads are coming in regardless. So it's also important to look for other indicators of compromise that might be related, and often, in every situation, ransomware is always going to make a call back to a C2 server, a command and control server. So, taking efforts and blocking things using DNS, maybe, various different DNS blocking tools out there like Cisco Umbrella, some other things, that can be an effective countermeasure. And there's just a lot of other methods for this that need to kind of be combined in addition to the signature-based detection, because in and of itself, it's just not going to be enough.
All right. Well, as always, the crowd is definitely making my job easy. We're already getting a ton of questions in, so I think we should go ahead and get started into it. Matthew, let's start with you on this first one. This one comes from Black Wolf. And the question is, it sounds as though you all are saying this was an obvious threat and that everyone should have been able to prevent it. Can you clarify on this? So Matthew, can you give us your thoughts on this?
Well, I think obvious is probably a little bit of a strong word, because if it was so obvious, I guess we would have been able to do something about it a little bit more better. But I mean, the point is it, in many ways, it wasn't a 0-day. It was there was a known vulnerability that had a patch, and what the attackers did is what they usually do is they assume most people won't patch, and then they take advantage of those that don't. And because this had a worm aspect to it, it spread incredibly fast. So I'd say it's just back to the basics. I mean, ultimately these attacks were basically snuffed out because people did patch some days later. And so instead of doing it 4 days later, if you did it 3 days earlier, it would essentially be a non-event at most organizations. So it's, patching, backing up, people process, improve your prevention. And, in most cases, you'll be ahead of the curve.
Mm-hmm. And Stu, let's go to you next. How do you feel like would have been the best way to prevent something like this in the future? Stu?
No, I'm thinking for a second. The best approach is what we call defense in depth. You kind of have to analyze your stack, and you're going from data on up. So data itself needs to be encrypted in both in flight and at rest. The next level up is the application. You need to have sufficient security on application level, in the sense of web apps that can easily be attacked from the outside, but any app needs to be secure coding. The level up from there, you can just continue to go up until you wind up with your mushy, messy outside layer of your defense in depth, which is called policy, procedure, and awareness. And you need to look at each one of those 5 hard and software layers plus the outside, and make sure that each one of those is well protected. So this thing goes the perimeter, your network, and your apps, and then on further down. So Google Defense in Depth, look at that concept, and then make sure you have each and every of these 6 layers actually in place and functioning. That will prevent these types of ransomware infections.
All right. Let's take another question. This one comes from Percussive Maintenance. He's asking, we'll start with Stacy on this, because Stacy, I know we've talked about this before. Do you guys foresee ransomware becoming a sleeper, i.e. infecting the backups instead of kind of coming out in the open right away after infection?
Sure. So there's really 2 answers to this, right? So once the data is backed up and it's in that state, it doesn't have the ecosystem to then spread. Okay. And that's important for people to understand, that if you back up, a virus, ransomware, whatever it might be, once it's in that backed up state, there's no longer an ecosystem for it to spread. So there's not a concern, or there should not be a concern with, hey, I backed this up, now is it going to spread to my other backups and things like that as well. The other side of that is, can at some point in time, my backup destination, right, instead be infected and be encrypted and those kind of things. We're lucky to date, that we haven't seen any of our, destinations or any of our backups be encrypted. I like to say that tomorrow is another day. We're working on this, and it's something that we're always considering. And that's why you should have that 3-2-1 policy, where you at the very end of it, you do have a copy of the data that's offline and cannot be accessed by anything. And that really is going to help you in case, they do start looking at, hey, let me find this data store and let me encrypt this particular backup data store, right? So if ransomware criminals start to figure out how to do that, your ultimate protection from that is having an offline copy of media.
Mm-hmm. Mark, anything to add to that? Are you guys seeing sleeper type ransomware or anything to be concerned about?
Not really yet. It is a concern for some of the reasons that Stacy mentioned, as well as just the fact that if you can't really trust your backups, and I don't mean the backup mechanism, but rather if you can't trust the files and their original content and whether they're infected or not, then you've got a little bit of a problem. I don't really see too many solutions for that right now, other than doing the regular restore process and then testing of those files. But again, if it's a sleeper, if there's a piece of ransomware that's embedded or has a payload inside of one of those files, and it hasn't been activated for however long your backup window is, 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it is, you could be looking at a potentially large problem. So I think, kind of going back to what Matthew had said several minutes ago, there's a multi-tiered approach you want to take with a lot of this. You want to make sure you're patching all the time, your backups are good, that your fortifications are good, that you've got all the latest up-to-date signatures for your firewalls and other endpoint protections. But you also want to be able to actively respond to these kinds of events. So the idea of, can we prevent this, or can we prevent the next thing? I think we all kind of know the answer, and we just don't really want to say it. The answer is no. You can't really expect to prevent everything that's going to be happening here in the future. You've got a lot of really smart guys that are working on this in the background, and as usual, they don't publish any of their findings because the more secretive they can be, the better. So beyond just preventative measures, which are of course a necessary foundation, besides regular patching, besides regular good and tested backups, you've also got to have a way to be able to respond to security events as they take place. And the only real way to do that is to keep up to date with all of the events that are happening inside of your environment, and again, constantly update and just be alarmed in a quick manner. And hopefully then you can prevent the spread a lot faster, so you can minimize the impact of that once a infection takes place.
Okay. Let's take a question from Crown Clown. I've seen this a lot in the news, and I don't even know what it is. But he's asking about ransomware 2.0, otherwise known as ransomware. Maybe Mark will stay with you on this one. What can you tell us about ransomware, and how is it different than what we already know of?
Yeah, I think ransomware is fairly similar to Petya, or more accurately, not Petya. So Petya was the 2016 version that kind of was the basic foundation for this. What just happened back in June of 2017 was officially called not Petya. And not Petya kind of falls under the realm of being a ransom or ransomworm. The term ransomware 2.0, I feel like that's maybe more of a bit of a marketing kind of term, but the basic concept is just taking ransomware and pairing it with a worm so that it can quickly spread itself. Nothing new about it whatsoever. Petya or not Petya was a little bit more sophisticated than Wannacry in its in the way that it was written and the way that it used things like establish a Tor connection to hide its information, that sort of thing. But really what this just comes down to is the fact that, again, you've got to make sure your systems that are vulnerable are patched. And as long as you're doing that, the likelihood of a worm spreading is going to be hopefully reduced or diminished. But yeah, as far as ransom worms go, that's kind of the latest on this. I do foresee that we're probably going to see more of these happening over in the future.
Okay. Stu, maybe we'll go to you next. What are your thoughts on ransomware, or anything to add to that?
Ransomware is in the very early stages. Just for fun, what you should do is go and look at stats for viruses. That's like 15, 20 years ago. And you see that stuff start out slowish, and then it goes in an exponential curve. Same thing is happening with ransomware. This is very early days, and you will see many different families, and ultimately the whole existing infrastructure that exists to create automatic viruses that are fully obfuscated, that every new strain is being essentially created 10 seconds after the earlier one. Ransomware is going to go the same route, and this is all in an attempt to evade existing software layers. Ransomware clearly is here to stay. It is cybercrime's, as of yet, most successful criminal business model. And ransomware 2.0 or ransomware 3.0 is going to be, you're going to turn on your smart TV and you need to pay a fraction of a Bitcoin to get your TV back. and then it will go further down into your toaster and or your electric car. I drive a Tesla, so I'm waiting for the day that I'm going to have to pay 0.11 Bitcoin to get into my car.
It'll happen soon, and it's probably true. Let's take a question from Percussive Maintenance, and Matthew, we'll start with you. So if all systems were fully patched, do you feel ransomware would basically go away?
No, no, definitely not, because you have the email attack that you can't patch the person. So the vast majority of ransomware attacks are for cyber criminals who are money focused. Maybe Petya and Wannacry are a little unclear why. Maybe it was a fail for money-oriented cyber criminals, or maybe it was somebody else doing it. But the vast majority of things like Locky and Cerber and whatnot, they're after money, and usually the way the most popular way to deliver any attack is via email, and they deliver via email so that and they lock up. They get essentially the user's permission to lock up the system by them double clicking or clicking the link, and once that happens, and the AV doesn't recognize it, it's going to execute at least on that machine, and perhaps it'll start to try to spread onto other machines. So at the end of the day, you can have fully patched systems that get encrypted by ransomware, and so by patching, you might stop the worm approach where there's just some vulnerability that it takes advantage of, but email is still by far the dominant way that most attacks get initiated, and that way you need preventive controls around email, and you need user awareness to hopefully minimize the chances they're going to click those things.
Okay, let's go and take a question. Where did I see that one? It was from Joe2233. Joe, what's going on, man? He's asking, what would you say is the effectiveness percentage-wise between implementing software and training when it comes to protecting against ransomware? And would actually like to get Stu, Matthew, and Mark to answer this. Stu, what are your, do you have any guidance for Joe as far as improvements to make when it comes to training? What kind of level of, improvement can folks expect?
Okay, yeah, training is one of your controls you want to have in. There is more and more regulation that simply requires you to do that. We took a year's worth of customer information, anonymized it. This is over 300,000 seats, and we looked at the initial baseline benchmark, which was about 16%. That people were falling for a relatively simple social engineering attack. We then followed those 300,000 users over a 12-month period, and the second and the third month, most of them stepped through training. At the end of 12 months, the percentage of people clicked were roughly between 1% and 2%. So it's never perfect. We're always dealing with humans, but you can actually get significant improvement in awareness training combined with frequent social engineering attacks on top of all your existing software controls. So it's not a matter of either or, it's a matter of you have to do it all.
Mm-hmm. Matthew, what about you guys for gateway services like what you guys provide? What is the level of improvement that you would expect?
Well, on the user awareness, I mean, we deliver some user awareness, but we're not a email training or a phishing training system, but we work with companies that do it, and we see users that do it. And the stats I've seen are a little worse, but the same idea basically, where before they're trained, they get phished as an experiment, and like 40 or 50% of the people don't recognize it. And then after some rigorous training and gamification of it and doing it for a few months, you take the stat down to 25, 20, 15, something. I've seen as low as 10 in some organizations. But of course, you also have the attacker on the other end. He can become more sophisticated. So the question is, how sophisticated are these social engineering attacks? But at the end of the day, you can definitely improve things by working on the user, but like Stu said, it's never going to be zero. And so that's why I often think of multi-layers of security about being your preventive controls as a group, which they themselves have multiple layers of security, like network and endpoint. And then you have monitoring or detective controls that sit behind that to try to detect an infection quickly so that you can then step into remediation and response. And in the case of user training, your user can be definitely part of your response, meaning they can be a line of defense and detection and be part of reporting the issue so that your incident responders can respond quickly. And so it's, I love the concept of multi-layers of defense. I think most people think of it in preventive controls like network and endpoint, but I think we need to think of it a little bit more holistically about preventive controls being backed up by detective controls, being backed up by response procedures that are really human driven.
Okay. Mark, anything from you guys? How I guess effective are antivirus solutions at the client level in preventing ransomware?
Yeah, to be honest, if I were to throw out some percentages, I feel like they'd probably be fairly skewed and probably just inaccurate. I do know that the training, especially, I think, is an important aspect of prevention, just like Stu had mentioned. Not only that training in education and awareness for the employees of the organization, but making sure that that's continuous, that it's not just a checkbox that you do, once a month or whatever, but that you continually have these kinds of trainings. I know inside of Alien Vault, our CISO takes it really seriously and it does a lot of trainings for the team. But what we also will actually implement are kind of test phishing campaigns and things like that, where a suspicious email will be sent to the company to pretty much every employee, and then he'll monitor to see how many people actually clicked on that. So I think things like that are good. We haven't quite gone so far as to do anything like a shame board, although there's been some ideas kicked around for that, where we put up people's names who clicked on the link. So certainly just constant awareness of what's going on and constant education of the end users. And then, as Matthew said, you've got to take a layered approach. There's no silver bullet for this. You've got to make sure, again, going back to all the basics that we've already reviewed, all of those things are covered. I do definitely see that the more diligent you are, the less likely you are to experience some sort of infection. So if you're really diligent about training, if you're really diligent about keeping the software up to date, that you have that's there as a protective measure, and also looking at those incidents as they come in and having that incident response plan there and something that you continually review, then you're going to be much better off in the case of an infection.
All right. Let's take a question from Brian9095. Stacy, we'll have you answer this one. Do you see any particular industries being targeted over others? I mean, we know that Wannacry looked like there was a heavy impact on the medical services industry, but are you guys hearing anything kind of similar?
Well, when you look at these organizations that are targeting companies, they look to the people primarily who are going to pay, right? And from a medical perspective, there's big fines tied around, if customer data cannot be provided, right? So medical is a huge target. Are they the only ones? Absolutely not. I mean, you could just go down the list, right? Finance, different things like that. So financial type of organizations, legal. I mean, obviously, I could go right down the list. I don't know that there's from my perspective that I've seen that there's one type of company that's more vulnerable. What I will say is that although, end users and, my home PC may be a target here and there, but that's more, in my opinion, of the overflow and hey, we'll get a little bit here and there, but the real targets are more of the companies and the organizations that have more to risk, banking, medical, those kind of things.
All right. Let's go ahead and take a question from Secure1273. Matthew, let's have you answer this one first. When reviewing open emails in a phishing campaign, how does the Outlook preview pane impact this? Does it count as the user opens the email?
No, I mean, at the end of the day, an email hits your inbox, you can't be penalized for that. Although if it's a malicious email, true malicious email, you should look at your preventive system to see how did it get there. But at the end of the day, if you're running a phishing simulation, it requires the user to interact, meaning execute the attachment if there is one, or click the link, because that's really how a piece of malware will start to do its thing. So just entering into the preview, it's not fair to penalize somebody for it entering his inbox.
Well, just I think the question is the nature of ransomware such that opening an email in a preview pane will kind of trigger, whether it's macro or whatever, or do you have to click the link in order to activate it, so to speak?
I think my experience, you have to click the link. I mean, you open a Word file, it asks you if you want to run the macro. Same thing with a PDF, and the user has to actively say yes, or if he has to click the link, and then some exploit will scan his browser or whatever and infect them. So just the fact that it's landed in your inbox and you've scrolled to look at it, particularly in a simulation, shouldn't penalize the user. In the real world, in general, I've experienced, you have to actually open the document, enable the macro, and/or click the link to enable the the connection to the external resource.
Gotcha. Let's take a question
Justin,
from. Go ahead.
That is generally the case. I got just aware at Black Hat of a particular kind of attack where the end user gets an email which is completely clean with a Word doc which is also in itself completely clean. It just happens to have a reference to a template. The template pulls in another template through SMB, and in what is being pulled down is the actual payload, and so there is no need in this particular scenario to click on the enable macros link, because the bad guys have as well bypassed that. So it never stops. It is a game of chess. And unfortunately, the bad guys have white, so they have the advantage. And that's why you really need to work hard on having all your controls in place and make sure that all your security layers update their both their signatures and the heuristics, if you will, on a very short notice, so that you can catch these things as quick as possible.
All right. Let's go back to Mark for this next one. This is from J.A. Corbella. Jeremy, what's going on, man? Haven't seen you in a while. He was asking, are you guys seeing anything as far as ransomware that scans for PII, personal identifiable information, and offloads that data to an external source while encrypting?
Yeah.
Oh, looks like we're losing your audio. Maybe Stacy,
Yeah,
anything from you? Or sorry,
I've seen that. If you want me to throw,
yeah, go ahead.
I can jump in. Yeah, we've definitely seen that. It's take the data, encrypt, and then often they'll I have seen it where they blackmail you, like, we're going to release publicly this data if you don't pay us. So there's two reasons to pay. They're trying to give you two reasons to pay. One, to get your data back, and two, if you won't do that, maybe you have good backups, then we're going to release it publicly, presuming it's some sort of sensitive data that public release would be bad for you. So it's sort of like, they're just increasing the chances of doubling the chances perhaps of getting paid. And so that's a technique I have seen not too long ago.
Okay, Mark, I think you're back. You have anything to add to that as far as ransomware that siphons off data in addition to encrypting it?
Yeah, and specifically, I think personal data. Yeah, that definitely is a worry. There are several different ransomware variants that will take advantage of that. There are some key ways to kind of try to combat that. One of those would be inside of your network IDS, looking for traffic that seems to match up with social security numbers, credit card algorithms, or even dates of birth. And there are several different solutions out there that can help you out with that. But yeah, it's a concern, and it is something that more and more attackers are interested in getting. Obviously, when most of the time when identities are stolen, it is through the use of some form of Trojan or just malware in general that's really getting that information for you or for the attacker. So something to look out for.
I want to take a question, Stacy, around disaster recovery. We've been talking a lot about backup. As far as disaster recovery planning around ransomware, do you have any advice on what companies need to be considering?
Well, they really need to, consider, that disaster recovery process that they've determined and they have in place. Is it something that they're readily testing? Right? You do not want to be at the time of recovery doubting on whether or not it's going to work or how long it's going to take to recover that data. So, always having a good policy in place, testing that policy, I think is key to that. You don't want to have any surprises when it comes to it's time to recover your data, right? You definitely want to have that in place. Mm-hmm. And then going back to what I had mentioned earlier was valuing your data and putting a dollar value onto that data, and then building the proper plan to protect that data, how frequently you protect it, and those kind of things as well.
This is a good question. This one comes from James. Stu, maybe we'll have you take this one. So tell us about who's actually creating this who is actually creating the ransomware? How many bad actors are there? Are they organized groups? Since cryptocurrency like Bitcoin makes it difficult to track down, do we have any information on who's actually authoring this stuff?
Sure. This is actually pretty well known. There are about 40 active organized cybercrime groups in Eastern Europe. Our law enforcement doesn't have much reach over there. And frankly, Vladimir Putin is using these guys as part of his asymmetric warfare. And so they have air cover from the Russian government. There is not much that you can do about these things at this point in time. There are many different ransomware families. Cerber is one of the very well-known ones that is furiously innovating. They came out with 4 new versions just in May. These guys are in it for the money, and they are working hard in getting what I call criminal market share.
All right. Matthew, anything to add to that? Or do you guys know anything or anything to add as far as who's actually creating this stuff?
Yeah, I think it's consistent. I mean, in my experience, this is what I call the industrialization of cybercrime, so that there's specialization. So you have, certain groups, maybe these 40 that was just referred to, creating it, but they're kind of like the hub of it. But then you have the distributors who are setting up the actual campaigns, like marketing campaigns to infect people. So it sort of spreads out, and there's a sharing of profits because they're all money oriented. And so you have, specializations. Some guy creates it. Maybe another guy hosts a ransomware as a service platform. Someone else, runs the marketing campaign targeted at different groups. Bitcoin and other cyber currencies is used as an anonymous payment system, and everybody gets cut in like any good business. They get cut in for the profits and get to focus on what they're good at, and and spread the risk and spread the wealth across the whole dark community.
All right, guys. I wanted to take one last question. We'll have all 4 of you guys answer it, which is, what do you do if you get hit? In an effort to not only get back up and running, but kind of make sure that the risk is mitigated. Maybe Stacy, we'll start with you. Obviously, as the backup guy, what do you feel like are the most important steps to take? Like as soon as you realize that you're infected. Go ahead.
So the very first most important step is to isolate, right, to isolate the event, to figure out, you know, how it got in, where it's infected, and how you can isolate it. Then you move into a disaster recovery perspective right away. Let's get machines back online. If my system is not clean, bring those systems up on another network, right? So I can continue to do day-to-day business, or while I'm still cleaning and taking care of the infection and all of that as well. The kind of the next step after that is, you know, once my network is clean and my systems are clean, let's recover that data. And if you've had disaster recovery systems running, let's recover the latest versions of that data and those applications back into the network, right? And then I think you would wrap it up with, you know, kind of again with education. You know, depending on how you got hit, you know, you would definitely want to educate your users to hey, this is how we got hit. You know, if it was a phishing scam, somebody clicked on an email, you don't need to single somebody out in a lot of cases, but you can definitely go back around, hey, we need to revisit training. And here's, because I think one side effect of this is, unfortunately, you know, a lot of people out there don't have a personal risk tied to it. So if the company gets infected or there's something like that, so they'll just go to a training, and yes, I check it off for my yearly training. They need to really understand the risk, and they need to have some type of commitment to it, right? So whether it's I'm periodically testing, or the company does its own phishing, you know, to see who clicks on it and how well the training is taking effect. The end user needs to understand that they're vital portion, right, to this security as far as that goes.
All right, let's go to Matthew. Let's go to you next. What's your advice for someone as soon as they realize that they've been infected?
Yeah, I'd say what was just described as the tech response, which is definitely important. But early on in that process, I would also initiate your IR plan, which should be cross-functional. And I don't mean create your IR plan, I mean initiate it. It should already have been created. And particularly with, you know, think of a hospital like the National Health Program in the UK that got hit by Wannacry. You know, you have legal issues, you have PR you have to manage, you have operations. I mean, okay, they're IT operations, but then they're also human operations in operating rooms. You know, management has to get involved, and all of that should not be, should not be fumbling around at the time sorting that out. You should be initiating the plan, because there are decisions that need to be made that are beyond the scope of IT people. You know, do we take the hospital down? What portion of the hospital would take down? Do we, you know, how do we contact patients that have scheduled procedures today? All of that, you know, should be part of your IT disaster recovery, and essentially ransomware is a type of disaster effectively that you need to be able to respond to from a business point of view.
Okay. Mark, we'll go to you next. What is your advice?
Yeah, a little bit of both on the tech side and the business side I can definitely agree with. So, you know, you want to make sure that you are having a regular review after these incidents so that the company can take that as a learning opportunity and really hopefully benefit from it for the future. Of course, nobody prepares for anything that they don't expect to get hit with. And once you've had that wake-up call, hopefully you would then have enough stakeholders on board to be able to really kind of go through the right measures for what happens when an incident occurs inside of your environment. So definitely agree with Matthew on that. And going back to what Stacy had said, yeah, it's super important to make sure that you're isolating the machine or machines that have been hit. There's a natural inclination for people to shut down or turn off their PC or their workstation if it's an individual system that's been hit. That's not always a good thing to do. As a matter of fact, it's usually a bad thing to do, and especially in the case of not Petya. If you had done that, then you've got an infected MBR, master boot record, and then it's going to go ahead and encrypt the entire disk at that point. So you don't necessarily want to shut the machine down, but you do want to isolate it, and usually that means taking it just off of the network, disabling networking, or physically unplugging it if it's got a hardwired connection. So regular review of the incident, isolation of the machine, and then of course always comes the backtrack and trying to determine what was the original source, what was the origin of source on where this attack came from, so that hopefully that can also be part of the measures that you take to kind of really secure either the border or other pieces of the network.
And Stu, last but not least, what's your advice for folks that are just realizing that they have an infection?
No, we took some time to list this out. So if you go to your resource list box, you just scroll down. There's the ransomware hostage rescue manual, and at the end of that, there's two lists. There's a ransomware attack response list, and there's also a ransomware prevention checklist. And I just recommend just grab that PDF and print it, because that gives you an overview which essentially summarizes everything that my fellow experts here already said, and then also a few things like, hey, if this is potentially a data breach, because in certain industries, for instance, HIPAA compliant industries, ransomware infections are more and more considered a data breach. The first thing you do, the very first thing you do, is you call your lawyer. Those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. All right. So guys, we're running out of time. Real quick, can we get just final thoughts or advice for people? We'll go in reverse order. Stu, so we'll start off again with you. What final advice do you have for the folks that are watching today?
Weapons grade backups. Have always one version off-site. Second, patching. Patch religiously. Third, make sure all your endpoint security is up to date and the latest versions and the latest, signatures. And fourth, at least once a month, send all your users a simulated social engineering attack so that they are on their toes with security top of mind.
All right. Sounds good. Matthew, let's go to you next. Any final advice for the crowd today?
Yeah, I would just echo the back to basics. Stay with the basics. So that's where most of the problems, originate. And I guess, I think that's it. Just if we could do the basics well consistently, the world would be much more secure.
We agree.
We'll go to you next. Final thoughts from you. Mark. Stacy, we'll go to you. We'll give Mark a second.
All right. So for me, it would definitely, final thoughts would be, always test your solutions, right? Test your backups, test your security products, test your people, right? And never be compliant. Never think that, hey, we have something in place and we're impervious to this. Always be looking to, are there new solutions out there? Are there new technologies from the vendors that you have, to make your jobs easier, to better protect you, to better automate some of this stuff? When you become lax, that's unfortunately when you start to fall behind.
Okay. And Mark, welcome back. Any final thoughts from you?
I am back. Final thoughts. Just want to echo what everyone else has said. Let's get back to the basics. If we all did the basics well, it would be a far less interesting conversation to have, I think, in the world of security. That, along with the idea, just the general thought always in your head of trust but verify. So trust that your employees are doing the right things, trust that you have the right safeguards in place, but always verify them. Go back and do a regular review process. Try to be transparent as possible inside of the organization with all members of the org, including the employees, the direct employees who potentially could become infected. And have an incident response plan. Have something ready to go before you're in panic mode. That would be my advice.
All right, sounds good, guys. Thanks again for asking all these great questions. It's time to announce the winner. The winner of the GoPro Hero 5 with headband is going to go to Preston SF. Preston, congratulations. You're the winner of our GoPro. You better take some really cool videos and share them with us. make sure to hit Emily up with a private message and let her know where you want that sent. Big thanks again to all of our panelists, Matthew, Stacy, Stu, and Mark. Had a great time hanging out with you guys. Folks are calling you guys the Ocean's 11 of ransomware. Hope we get a chance.
I want to be George Clooney.
Yeah, that's kind of where that stood from.
And Ocean's 14 is coming out in a year, by the way.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm glad we finally put that one. We heard it first here, guys. Mark was able to break that news. Make sure to check out all the other events we got coming up, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye, everyone.
See you guys.
See you guys.
Take care.